My name is Betty Hayslett, and I was 37 years old the night everything quietly snapped inside me over a bowl of linguine and a glass of wine. It wasn't a dramatic break, no shouting or tears, just a slow, precise moment of clarity, like a thread finally giving out after being pulled too tight for too long. We were at La Rosetta, the Italian place my boyfriend Caleb Mercer adored. Every month we met there with his old college friends, four couples, familiar faces, predictable conversations. Caleb was in a loud, animated mood that night, swirling his wine, interrupting people, and trying too hard to be the charismatic one in the room. I had grown used to it, the way he needed an audience, the way other people needed air. The shift happened during what should have been a harmless moment. Someone had asked about my new project at work, and before I managed to answer, Caleb leaned back in his chair, smirked, and gestured at me with his fork. "Betty needs a new personality," he announced. "This one's basically broken, like a couch someone should have thrown out years ago." The table went silent. His friend's wife stared at her plate. Someone tried to laugh but cut themselves off halfway. The waiter froze with a wine bottle mid-pour. I felt the kind of heat that doesn't touch your skin but burns through your ribs, the kind that comes from humiliation you've swallowed too many times. Caleb kept going. "Come on, she knows I'm joking. She's like furniture expensive but doesn't really do anything." He laughed at his own words, but nobody else joined him. The silence felt heavier than the insult. I looked around the table and realized something painfully simple. This wasn't the first time, not even close. His little digs at my expense had been happening for months, always in public, always disguised as jokes, always immediately dismissed when I confronted him later. But this time, for the first time, the room recognized how uncomfortable it was. They weren't laughing. They weren't looking at either of us. For a long moment, Caleb waited for me to play my usual role, smile, shrug it off, act like it didn't sting. I had trained myself to be tolerant, patient, understanding. I'd told myself he was stressed, that maybe I was interpreting things too literally, that maybe this was just his clumsy sense of humor. But in that strange, suspended moment, I understood something with a clarity that almost frightened me. I was done pretending. I set my napkin on the table, pushed my chair back, and stood. "Caleb," I said, calm and steady, "you're single now." The reaction was immediate. A few people gasped. One of the men muttered, "Holy crap." Caleb blinked twice, confused, as if he didn't understand the words. "Betty, wait, what are you talking about?" "It was a joke," he said, half laughing, half panicking. But his confusion only reaffirmed how deeply he believed I would never leave, no matter how I was treated. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I didn't give him the chance to drag me back into another conversation where he'd make himself the victim and me the unreasonable one. I simply walked past the bar, past the hostess stand, and out the front door. I heard him calling my name behind me, his shoes scraping against the floor as he hurried after me. But I kept moving. The cold night air felt cleaner and sharper than anything I'd breathed in weeks. By the time I reached my car, my phone was vibrating nonstop, lighting up with calls and messages. I blocked his number without opening a single text. When I got home, my home one, I bought long before Caleb came into my life, I walked upstairs and packed a single duffel bag. I didn't take much, a few clothes, my laptop, basic toiletries, my important documents. I didn't feel the need to gather anything sentimental. Nothing about Caleb felt sentimental anymore. I checked into a hotel on the edge of town, a modest place with beige walls and a view of the highway. It didn't matter what it looked like. What mattered was that it was quiet. I turned my phone off and slept with a depth and ease I hadn't felt in months. The next morning, sunlight came in through the thin curtains, and for the first time in a long time, I woke up without dreading anything. I turned my phone back on, partly out of habit, partly out of curiosity. Instantly, dozens of notifications appeared. Missed calls, voicemails, texts, long paragraphs, angry bursts, pleading messages, variations of, "You're overreacting, we need to talk, you're being insane, don't throw this away," and it was just a joke. I deleted them all. Then I blocked his number again, just for the satisfaction of seeing his name vanish from the screen. Once it was quiet, I called a lawyer I knew from my company's networking events. He specialized in family and civil matters, and he picked up on the second ring. His voice was steady and professional, exactly what I needed. "Betty," he asked, "what happened?" My boyfriend publicly humiliated me. Repeatedly. Last night was the final time. I need to start whatever the legal equivalent of drawing a boundary is, immediately. There was a brief silence before he spoke again. It sounds like you've made up your mind. I have. He explained what could be done, what steps would follow, what documents he'd need, and what the timeline would look like. Everything in my situation was simple: no shared property, no shared accounts, no children, a home fully in my name. We can file today, he said. My assistant will reach out with the paperwork. When I hung up, I felt a strange mix of heaviness and relief. I wasn't naive. I knew Caleb would react badly. I just didn't know how badly. That morning, I thought walking out of that restaurant had been the hardest part. I had no idea it was only the beginning. The morning after I filed the paperwork, I expected silence. I thought Caleb would retreat into one of his dramatic sulks, call a few friends, complain about how unreasonable I was, and then eventually accept it. If anything, I underestimated him. Caleb didn't retreat. He went to war. It started with the predictable barrage. Messages from new numbers, blocked numbers, emails from addresses I didn't recognize. Every tone imaginable: angry pleading, manipulative, apologetic, accusatory. Like he was throwing darts and hoping one would hit the version of me that used to cave. I didn't respond to a single one. The silence drove him wild. Then his family joined in. The first call came from his sister Marissa, a woman who had always treated me with polite distance, as if she suspected I would someday betray her brother simply by having my own boundaries. She didn't even start with a greeting. "What is wrong with you?" she demanded. "Caleb is devastated. You embarrassed him in front of everyone. You owe him a conversation at least." I hung up before she finished. She called again. Blocked. Then his mother called. Blocked. Then one of his friend's girlfriends attempted to intervene. He's a mess. "Betty, can you just talk to him?" Blocked. Every call felt like confirmation I'd made the right decision. But Caleb wasn't finished. When guilt didn't work, he escalated. This new version of him wasn't petty. He was strategic. He wanted access control any way back into my life he could force. The first real sign came when my debit card got declined at a gas station. I stood there in front of the pump confused, knowing I had more than enough in the account. A call to the bank revealed the issue. "There was a fraud alert placed on your account," the representative explained. "A woman reported suspicious activity and claimed you were experiencing mental distress." My stomach dropped. "A woman?" "Yes. She provided your social security number and personal details, enough that our system initially accepted the request. Only one person would do that. Only one person knew enough pieces of my life to sound convincing." It took almost 3 hours at the branch, sitting at a little desk under fluorescent lights, verifying everything, undoing everything, proving my identity, freezing access, adding new protections. I wasn't angry. I was stunned. There was a kind of cold clarity in realizing how easily Caleb slipped into pretending to be concerned about my mental health if it meant controlling me. When I left the bank, my lawyer was the first person I called. "He impersonated you," he asked, his voice immediately alert. "Document everything. Email me the bank manager's statement. This crosses into harassment." I thought that was the worst of it. It wasn't. 2 days later, I went back to my house, the house I bought 5 years before I met Caleb, to pick up some additional clothes and a few things from my office. My key didn't work. I tried again slower, thinking maybe it was the angle. Nothing. The lock had been changed. For several seconds, I just stared at the door, confused at first, then slowly horrified. I knocked. Hard. I kept knocking until I heard movement inside and the door finally cracked open. Caleb stood there looking at me as if I were the intruder. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "I live here," I said. "Open the door." "You left," he replied calmly, as if stating a fact. "You walked out on me. You can't just come back and pretend nothing happened. This is my house. My name is on the deed, not yours." He shrugged. "We were practically living together. That means something legally. You abandoned the relationship without notice, which is—" I stopped listening. I called my lawyer on speaker right in front of him. Then, per his direction, I called the police. It took less than 15 minutes for an officer to arrive. Caleb's confidence deflated the moment he saw the uniform. The officer asked one simple question. "Sir, is your name on the deed?" Caleb hesitated. "Well, no, but—" "Then you cannot change the locks. Step aside and let her in." He had no choice but to comply. When I entered, I found my belongings shoved into garbage bags and dumped in the garage. Clothes wrinkled and mixed with shoes. Paperwork folded and crushed at the bottom of a torn bag. Things that had been neatly placed in drawers now thrown together as if he were cleaning out a stranger's storage unit. I stared at the mess for several seconds before speaking. "This is how you treat my things." He crossed his arms. "You left me. What was I supposed to do? Leave everything the way it was, like some pathetic abandoned husband?" The officer gave him a look that communicated exactly how little sympathy he had. "Sir, putting someone's belongings in trash bags when they legally live here is not acceptable." Caleb rolled his eyes as if everyone else were being unreasonable. With the officer's help, I documented everything: photos, timestamps, statements. Once everything was packed into my car, I headed for the driveway. Caleb followed me out, face shifting from cold to trembling. "Betty, please," he said suddenly. "I'm sorry. Okay, I didn't mean any of this. I'm hurt." "You're not sorry," I said. "You're cornered." His lips parted as if he wanted to argue, but no words came out. For a moment, he just stared at me, stunned that I no longer softened my voice for him. The officer, who had been watching patiently, spoke quietly as I opened my car door. "You're making the right decision," he said. "Nobody deserves to be treated like that." I nodded, but I didn't speak. I didn't trust myself to. I thought the lock changing and fraud alert would be the end of his behavior, but Caleb seemed to believe that if he could complicate my life enough, disrupt my routines, sabotage my accounts, wedge himself into every corner, I would eventually reach out, negotiate, maybe even come back. Instead, something inside me solidified. I was no longer merely leaving a bad relationship. I was preparing for a fight I didn't anticipate, but now fully understood. He wasn't trying to win me back. He was trying to punish me for leaving. And he was just getting started. Caleb's spiral didn't slow down after the police forced him to let me into my own home. If anything, that moment seemed to push him further into a kind of frantic, wounded entitlement. He wasn't used to consequences. He wasn't used to anyone telling him no, least of all me. My lawyer called the next morning. "Betty, he's filed a response contesting the separation. He's claiming abandonment and emotional cruelty." I laughed. Actually laughed because the absurdity was too much. Emotional cruelty. For walking out after he called me broken in front of 8 people. "He's also alleging that you changed the locks," my lawyer added. I went silent. For a second, I wondered if Caleb believed his own lies, or if he simply assumed everyone else was too stupid to notice his contradictions. "We have police reports," my lawyer reminded me. "He doesn't have a leg to stand on." Still, it was unsettling. Caleb wasn't just being petty. He was rewriting the story in his head and insisting the world accept his version. It was the same attitude he had in the relationship. Whatever he believed in the moment became the truth, no matter how irrational or provably false. And now it was turning into a legal strategy. To counter his claim, my lawyer advised me to gather witness statements from everyone at the dinner. I was afraid they might decline, or worse, take Caleb's side. Instead, all 3 couples replied within the hour. "We saw everything. He crossed a line. We've been uncomfortable with how he talks to you for a while. Whatever you need, we'll sign." One of the husbands added something that made my chest tighten. "We thought the way he talked to you was your dynamic. We didn't realize it was one-sided." Their statements were blunt, thorough, and damning. I forwarded them to my lawyer, who practically purred through the phone. "This is very strong. He won't win a single argument with this pattern established." But Caleb wasn't done manufacturing chaos. A few days later, my gym membership was suddenly canceled, the day after my car insurance. Then I got emails confirming requests to close out online accounts, streaming platforms, even a delivery service I barely used. Every company gave the same explanation. "Someone contacted us pretending to be you." I spent hours reinstating everything, adding passwords, PIN codes, extra verification steps, and alerts. It was exhausting, not because of the logistics, but because of what it revealed. His desperation wasn't fueled by heartbreak, it was about control. Caleb wasn't grieving the end of our relationship. He was furious that I no longer lived in a world where he got to decide the rules. My lawyer took it seriously. "Keep documenting," he said. "Every impersonation, every canceled service, every fraudulent attempt. This is harassment, plain and simple." There was no version of Caleb I recognized in these actions. Or maybe this was who he'd always been, someone who only felt safe when someone else was losing their footing. In our relationship, I'd been the buffer, the one who apologized, first soothed his ego, tolerated his moods, and reshaped my boundaries around his insecurities. Without me softening the world for him, he was spiraling. The court hearing for temporary possession of the house came quickly. I arrived early, wearing a navy blouse and simple slacks, feeling composed but tense. Caleb walked in 10 minutes late, looking rumpled and agitated, his lawyer trailing behind him with the expression of a man who regretted his career choices. Caleb avoided eye contact with me, but when he sat down, I saw the redness around his eyes. Not from crying more, like he'd been yelling. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair and a sharp gaze, wasted no time. We're here to determine temporary occupancy of the residence, located at 124 North Hill Drive. Ms. Hazlett, you state the property was purchased solely in your name prior to your relationship with Mr. Mercer. Yes, Your Honor. And you have documentation. My lawyer handed it over. The judge reviewed it, nodding. Mortgage, utilities, insurance, entirely in your name. Thank you. Caleb's lawyer stood. Your Honor, while the property is technically in Ms. Hazlett's name, my client has resided there for 2 years. He has contributed emotionally and practically to the home. The judge raised a hand. Legally speaking, residing somewhere does not create ownership or equal rights. Do you have evidence of financial contribution? His lawyer shifted. Not financial, Your Honor, but that will not suffice. Caleb muttered something under his breath, then loudly added, She abandoned me. She walked out without warning. My lawyer rose. Your Honor, may I present the witness's statements regarding his public behavior leading to that decision? The judge scanned them quickly. Mr. Mercer, according to these reports, you repeatedly humiliated Ms. Hazlett in public and made derogatory remarks. Is that accurate? It was a joke, Caleb insisted. She can't take a joke. The judge looked over her glasses. Calling someone broken furniture is not a joke in any meaningful sense. Furthermore, you impersonated Ms. Hazlett with her bank and service providers. You changed the locks on a home you do not own. You placed her belongings in garbage bags. Caleb's jaw tightened. She left. What was I supposed to do? Respect her property and the law, the judge said coolly. When she granted me exclusive possession of the house and ordered Caleb to vacate within 2 weeks, the look on his face shifted from disbelief to panic. 2 weeks, he repeated. Where am I supposed to go? That is not this court's concern, the judge replied. You do not have legal standing to remain. After the hearing outside the courtroom, Caleb's sister stormed toward me. You're seriously throwing him out on the street. After everything he's done for you. I turned to her calmly. What exactly has he done for me? She opened her mouth, then closed it. She had no answer. My lawyer touched my arm, gently guiding me away. Caleb stood in the hallway watching us leave with an expression that chilled me. It wasn't heartbreak. It wasn't sorrow. It was resentment, cold, focused resentment. I realized then that he wasn't going to fade quietly out of my life. He wasn't going to accept defeat gracefully. Caleb wasn't done, not even close. And the next escalation would be uglier than the last. 2 weeks. That was all the time Caleb had to pack up his things and walk out of the house he never contributed $1 toward. For most people, that would have been a humbling moment, maybe even the beginning of reflection. But Caleb wasn't most people. Humility had never been part of his vocabulary, and self-reflection certainly wasn't. The day after the hearing, he launched a new strategy, one that was somehow more audacious and more delusional than anything he'd done so far. He filed for partner support, claiming he had sacrificed his career to support my life. When my lawyer read the paperwork, he laughed so hard he had to mute the phone. He's truly committed to this. Isn't he, Betty? He didn't sacrifice a career. He barely had one. He worked part-time retail, I reminded him. Exactly, which means there is no legal basis for support. But we'll fight it and we'll win. Honestly, cases like this are instructive for judges. They remind them why certain statutes exist. I wasn't amused. I was exhausted. But I gathered everything he requested, my income history, the mortgage payments I'd made alone, utility bills, insurance statements, tax returns, showing my single filing status every year. On Caleb's side, we had 5 years of disorganized pay stubs from 6 different part-time jobs, none of which lasted more than 8 months. Not one showed over 25 hours a week. All of this was, as my lawyer put it, career sacrifice in the same way eating lunch is a workout routine. Caleb, meanwhile, was busy playing victim. His social media exploded with posts about abusive partners, financial manipulation, and being abandoned after giving everything. He never mentioned my name, but the implication was obvious. He posed dramatically next to half-packed boxes. He posted close-up photos of his face with red eyes, claiming he hadn't slept or eaten. His followers, mostly old friends he hadn't seen since college, showered him with sympathy. She doesn't deserve you. You gave her your best years. You're too good for this. I didn't respond. I didn't even read the comments. My friends sent screenshots, but after the second one, I told them to stop. I didn't need that poison in my head. The worst part, some of his posts were filmed inside my house. He was documenting himself as if he were being evicted from a home he had built with his bare hands. Never mind that he never paid for the roof over his head. Never mind that he never even bought light bulbs. In Caleb's mind, possession was 9/10 of reality. I stayed away from the house the entire 2-week period, both on my lawyer's advice and because I didn't trust myself to remain composed if I saw him. I didn't trust him either. Every time my phone buzzed, I braced myself for another disaster. One morning, that disaster came in the form of a call from my insurance company. "Hello, Ms. Hazlett," the representative said. "We have a request on file to cancel your homeowner's policy at the end of the month. We're calling to confirm." I went cold. Cancel? Who requested that? A man claiming to be your partner. He provided your address and phone number. I closed my eyes, steadying myself. Do not cancel anything. Add a note to the file. He is not authorized, and we are undergoing legal proceedings. Flag the account for fraudulent contact. We'll take care of it, the representative assured me. This happens more often than you'd think. More often than you'd think. That sentence sat with me long after the call ended. How many people had to deal with this? How many partners like Caleb weaponized the mundane parts of life, utilities, memberships, subscriptions, as a form of punishment? Every sabotage he attempted was another confirmation I had been living with someone who needed power the way other people needed love. The final week before eviction, Caleb's panic became more visible. His posts turned from theatrical sadness to grand declarations about justice and retribution. He contacted acquaintances I barely knew, feeding them a warped narrative about how I destroyed him financially. Some reached out to me, asking if it was true. I sent each of them the same brief message, no. I supported him financially for years. He is retaliating because I ended the relationship. Most of them went quiet afterward. A few apologized. Then eviction day arrived. I parked down the street with my lawyer and waited for the sheriff's car. When it pulled up, I felt a complicated mix of dread and closure. The sheriff greeted us professionally, then walked up the driveway and knocked. Caleb opened the door after a long, deliberate pause. He was unshaven, wearing an old hoodie, his hair a mess of frustrated fingers. When he saw the sheriff's badge, his whole face changed, anger collapsing into panic. Panic hardening into indignation. "Ma'am, you have 2 hours to remove your belongings from the premises," the sheriff said. "This is my home," Caleb insisted. "No," the sheriff replied calmly, holding out the court order. "According to this, and the deed and the judge's ruling, this is her home. You are required to vacate." Caleb deflated for the briefest moment, then recovered with anger. "This is ridiculous. She abandoned the relationship. She left me with nothing." "That's a civil matter," the sheriff said. "This is a property matter. You must leave today." His mother pulled up minutes later with a borrowed moving truck. She stormed up the driveway, eyes blazing, and hissed at me like a cornered cat. "You should be ashamed, throwing a man out like trash." "I didn't throw him out," I said calmly. "The judge did, based on his behavior." She looked away. Even she couldn't argue that part. The next 2 hours were a blur of boxes shouting and slammed doors. Caleb cried, then raged, then sank into theatrics, insisting he was the true victim, that everyone was conspiring against him, that I had manipulated the entire legal system. I stayed in my car the whole time as instructed, watching the last remnants of our shared life scatter into cardboard and bitterness. When they finished. When the truck finally pulled away, I walked into my house again. The air smelled different, emptier, but somehow lighter, like tension had evaporated. I changed the locks immediately. Then I hired a security company to install cameras around the house. Not because I was paranoid, because I knew exactly how far Caleb was willing to go. 3 days later, I received a thick envelope from a new attorney representing him. Caleb was now suing me for retroactive partner support, claiming he lost years of professional advancement because he prioritized my life, my home, and my needs. My lawyer shook his head. "He's spiraling. We'll fight it. But prepare yourself, he's not done." He was right. Caleb's next court performance would make everything before it looked tame. Caleb's lawsuit for retroactive partner support was the last flare of a dying fire. A dramatic, desperate grasp for control from someone who had never learned to live without it. By the time the hearing arrived, even his own lawyer seemed exhausted by him. Mine walked beside me with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly how this would end. The courtroom was smaller than the previous one, but colder somehow, with white walls that made every whisper echo. Caleb sat at his table alone. No lawyer, no family, no audience. Just a trembling stack of handwritten motions and photocopies, and a pen he kept clicking over and over as though the sound might steady him. His eyes flicked to me when I entered. There was no shame, no regret, only the bruised pride of a man who couldn't accept that the world had stopped revolving around him. The judge reviewed the documents in silence. Then she looked up, expression blank. Mr. Mercer, you are requesting partner support based on lost career opportunities. Do you have evidence of consistent employment prior to or during your relationship with Ms. Hazlett? Caleb puffed himself up as though preparing to recite a speech. I worked many jobs, he said proudly. I did what I had to do. Part-time retail, I thought. 6 positions in 5 years. None over 25 hours a week. My lawyer handed the judge the employer records we'd subpoenaed. She examined them slowly, line by line, as Caleb tried not to squirm. Finally, she asked, Mr. Mercer, can you explain why your employment history shows frequent job changes and minimal hours? I was focused on supporting our home, he stammered. I put my own ambitions aside for stability. For her. For stability, the judge repeated, raising an eyebrow. Ms. Hazlett paid the mortgage utilities insurance and contributed the full financial support of the household. What specifically did you sacrifice? Caleb's mouth opened, but nothing came out. His silence stretched into something thick and uncomfortable. My lawyer spoke. Your Honor, we have provided proof of Ms. Hazlett's sole financial responsibility for all household expenses. Additionally, we submitted documentation of Mr. Mercer's harassment impersonation attempts, fraudulent account interference, and illegal lock changes to Ms. Hazlett's residence. The judge lifted the stack of evidence. Yes, I see it here. It is extensive. She turned to Caleb again. Mr. Mercer, why should this court consider granting support to someone who contributed neither financially nor legally, and who engaged in documented harassment? He snapped, because she ruined my life. The judge didn't flinch. No, Mr. Mercer, you ruined your own case. Caleb pushed his chair back so hard it screeched against the floor. You're all against me. You're eating out of her hand. She has money. She has influence. That is enough, the judge said sharply. If you continue with this behavior, I will hold you in contempt. He didn't stop. She's lying. She's making me look crazy. I'm the one who sacrificed. Bailiff, the judge said quietly. 2 officers approached. Caleb froze, suddenly aware of the line he had crossed. They escorted him out, still muttering, still insisting everyone was wrong except him. His voice trailed off as the doors closed behind him. His case was dismissed in under 2 minutes. My lawyer exhaled. I'll draft the final paperwork. This chapter is close to over. And he was right. The legal storm that had consumed months of my life ended not with a bang, but with Caleb's final meltdown echoing down a courthouse hallway. The weeks that followed were quiet in a way that felt almost unfamiliar. I returned fully to my house, not tiptoeing in, not bracing for sabotage, but truly home. And I needed it desperately. I spent my evenings repainting walls, rearranging rooms, replacing the furniture that never felt like mine. It wasn't about erasing Caleb from the space. It was about reclaiming something I'd slowly surrendered without even realizing it. I boxed the last of his things, old photos, shirts. He left behind a few books and dropped them at his mother's doorstep without knocking. I didn't want a confrontation. I didn't want yelling accusations or another guilt speech about how I abandoned him. I wanted closure, and that was the quietest version I could give myself. For a long time, my life had been narrowed to the tight emotional corridor of Caleb's moods. When I stepped outside of that, the world felt bigger, brighter, easier to breathe in. Work was good. My focus sharpened. My supervisor noticed. 2 months after the final hearing, I was promoted to a managerial position I'd quietly hoped for but never dared pursue while tangled in Caleb's chaos. And slowly, very slowly, I allowed myself to consider something I didn't think I'd want again: connection. His name was Julian Park, a man I met in the most ordinary way possible while reaching for the same book on a shelf at a small independent bookstore. We laughed, talked about authors, shared coffee the following week. It was nothing dramatic, nothing intense or sweeping. It was comfortable, easy. He listened when I spoke. He didn't interrupt. He didn't belittle. He didn't dominate conversations. He asked questions. He remembered details. The first time he asked about my past relationship, I gave him the condensed version. He shook his head slowly and said, "She sounds exhausting." "She was," I replied, and it took me months to understand how much I accepted. He didn't pry further. He just said, "I'm glad you're not with her anymore," before correcting himself. Sorry. I laughed. It felt good to laugh. We took our time. I wasn't rushing into anything serious. I wasn't trying to fill a void. I was simply learning what it felt like to be treated with the basic respect I had once mistaken for luxury. As for Caleb, news of him drifted back to me through acquaintances. He had moved in with his mother, picked up a full-time waitressing job, the first full-time work he'd had in years. Still complaining, still telling people I took everything from him, still painting himself as the victim of a grand injustice. But for the first time, his audience was shrinking. Mutual friends began distancing themselves. One finally confronted him, telling him the truth, that he hadn't lost anything I owed him, and that he had been cruel long before I walked away. Caleb cried, claimed everyone was against him, but something had shifted. The world wasn't buying the narrative anymore. And it wasn't my problem. It wasn't my guilt to carry my burden, to soothe my mood, to fix. Months later, I drove past La Rosetta, the restaurant where everything had begun to unravel. I expected a wave of bitterness or sadness, maybe even a sting of old humiliation. But the moment came and went without a flicker of emotion. It was just a building, just a place where I stopped accepting the version of myself that Caleb had tried to shrink me into. That night, sitting in my car outside my house, new paint on the walls, new furniture, new locks, new peace, I finally understood something that had taken me nearly 4 decades to learn. Leaving wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of the first